The clatter of a silver fork against fine china was the only sound that dared to break the deafening silence. Olivia sat stunned, the city lights of New York twinkling cruelly through the panoramic window of Le Ciel, a restaurant so exclusive it felt like dining amongst the stars. But her world had just plummeted to earth. Across the table, the chair once occupied by her husband, the millionaire titan Liam Rollins, was starkly empty. He had just uttered 5 words that shattered her reality. "I can't do this anymore," before standing up, tossing a platinum credit card on the table, and walking away, leaving his 6-month pregnant wife alone in a sea of judgment and pity. Little did he know this public humiliation was just the first act in a drama that would unravel a dynasty. The air in Le Ciel was thick with the scent of money and ambition, a fragrance Olivia had grown accustomed to over her 3 years of marriage to Liam Rollins. It was a perfume of freshly printed stock certificates, expensive leather, and the subtle, almost metallic tang of power. Tonight, however, it smelled of ash. Liam had been distracted all evening, his sapphire eyes, usually so full of life and a mischievous spark when they landed on her, were distant and cold. He'd barely touched his pan-seared scallops, his favorite. He swirled the ruby-red liquid in his wineglass, a 1982 Chateau Margaux that cost more than her first car, his jaw tight. Olivia had tried to bridge the chasm that had inexplicably opened between them on the car ride over. "Is everything all right with the Sterling Cross deal, darling?" she had asked, her hand resting on his knee. He had flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but for a woman who had studied the landscape of her husband's moods like a seasoned cartographer, it was a seismic shift. "It's fine," he'd clipped, his gaze fixed on the blur of Fifth Avenue's glittering storefronts. Now sitting opposite his empty chair, the word "fine" echoed in her mind, a cruel joke. He had summoned her here to their place, the restaurant where he'd proposed, with a cryptic text. "We need to talk. Le Ciel, 8 p.m. She had spent the afternoon in a state of nervous excitement, her heart fluttering with the hope that he was finally ready to address the growing distance between them. She had chosen her dress with care, a deep emerald silk gown from Valentino that flowed over her burgeoning belly, a silent testament to the new life she carried their son. She had arrived glowing a picture of expectant motherhood and marital bliss, only to have that portrait slashed to ribbons. "I can't do this anymore," he'd said, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd fallen in love with. It was the voice of Liam Rollins, the CEO, the man who could eviscerate a rival company with a single brutal decision. It was not the voice of her Liam, the man who would trace constellations on her back in the dead of night and whisper silly jokes until she was weak with laughter. Do what she had managed to ask her own voice a fragile thread. "Liam, what are you talking about? Is it the baby? Are you scared because we can—" He had cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "This. Us. The baby." He had gestured vaguely between them, his face a mask of cold indifference. It was a mistake. A mistake. Their love, their life, their unborn child. A mistake. The word ricocheted around the cavern of her skull, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. He hadn't offered any further explanation. No tearful confession, no heated argument, just a chillingly calm severance. He stood a towering figure in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, a man who commanded every room he entered, and in that moment he commanded the complete and utter destruction of her world. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable, and then he was gone. The murmurs started almost immediately, a low, insidious hum from the surrounding tables. She could feel the stares, a physical weight pressing down on her. The couple at the next table, a hedge fund manager she vaguely recognized and his surgically enhanced wife, were whispering behind their menus, their eyes flicking towards her with a mixture of morbid curiosity and smug pity. She was no longer Olivia Rollins, wife of a titan. She was a spectacle. The pregnant woman abandoned by the millionaire. A waiter, a young man with kind eyes whose name she couldn't recall, approached her table, his expression a careful mixture of professionalism and sympathy. "Mrs. Rollins, is everything—" He trailed off, gesturing to the empty chair. He had an urgent call. She lied, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, the crystal cool against her feverish skin. She had to get out of there. But where would she go? Their sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue suddenly felt like a gilded cage, a monument to a life that was no longer hers. She fumbled for her phone in her Bottega Veneta clutch, her fingers clumsy and numb. She scrolled through her contacts, a list of names that suddenly felt like strangers. Her friends, mostly wives of Liam's business associates, would offer platitudes and then dissect her misfortune over brunch the next day. Her own family, a quiet middle-class family from Connecticut, would be heartbroken, their world turned upside down by a reality they had never fully understood. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She would not cry, not here, not in front of them. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the expensive air a cruel reminder of the life she was losing. She had to be strong. For her baby. Summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stood her back ramrod straight. She ignored the whispers, the stares, the suffocating pity. She walked each step a small victory against the overwhelming urge to collapse. As she passed the maitre d', a man who had always greeted her with fawning deference, he averted his gaze, a subtle but clear sign that her status had been irrevocably downgraded. Outside, the cool night air was a shock to her system. The city that had once felt like her kingdom now seemed alien and hostile. A doorman rushed to hail her a cab, his usual cheerful banter replaced by a respectful silence. As she sank into the back of the yellow taxi, the tears finally came hot, silent tracks down her cheeks. The glittering skyline blurred into a kaleidoscope of broken promises and shattered dreams. She was 6 months pregnant alone, and her life had just been detonated. The taxi ride was a blur of neon and tears. Olivia gave the driver the address to their penthouse out of sheer numb habit. It was only as the cab pulled up to the curb in front of the opulent, limestone-faced building on Park Avenue, with its uniformed doormen and hushed cathedral-like lobby, that the full weight of her new reality crashed down on her. She couldn't go in there. Not tonight. Not ever again. It wasn't just a home. It was a museum of their life together. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves was a shared memory, a testament to a love she had believed to be indestructible. To walk through those rooms now would be to walk through a graveyard of happiness. "Wait," she told the driver, her voice hoarse. Can you just drive for a bit?" The driver, a burly man with a kind face, glanced at her in the rear-view mirror, his expression softening with concern. He saw the tear-streaked face, the designer dress, the unmistakable swell of her pregnancy. He didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and pulled back into the relentless river of New York traffic. They drove for what felt like hours, a silent, aimless journey through the city's veins. They passed through the vibrant, chaotic streets of Greenwich Village, the quiet, tree-lined avenues of the Upper West Side, and the glittering, tourist-filled expanse of Times Square. Olivia watched the city go by, a silent movie playing outside her window, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and pain. Where had it all gone wrong? Was it a gradual erosion or a sudden catastrophic collapse? Had she missed the signs? Had there been another woman? The thought was a sharp physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Liam, with his charm, his wealth, his undeniable magnetism, would have had no shortage of opportunities. She thought back over the past few months. He had been working longer hours, his phone had become an extension of his hand, guarded with a new, almost obsessive privacy. There had been hushed conversations in his study doors, closing softly as she approached. At the time, she had attributed it to the pressures of the Sterling Cross merger, a deal that would cement his place at the apex of the financial world. Now, in the harsh, unforgiving light of his abandonment, every late night, every whispered call, every moment of distraction took on a sinister new meaning. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a series of frantic incoming calls from Liam. She stared at his name on the screen, a name that had once filled her with a sense of security and love, now a symbol of her deepest betrayal. She silenced the phone, unable to bear the thought of hearing his voice. What could he possibly say? That it was a joke. A mistake. He had said his piece. The silence was his final brutal statement. Her mind then drifted to another woman, a woman who had always been a silent, formidable presence in their lives. Eleanor Rollins, Liam's mother. A woman as cold and unyielding as the marble in her Upper East Side townhouse. Eleanor had never approved of Olivia. She saw her as a gold digger, a pretty face with a middle-class background who was unworthy of the Rollins name and fortune. Eleanor had made her disapproval clear from the very beginning with a series of subtle cutting remarks and a glacial politeness that was more intimidating than any overt hostility. Olivia had tried to win her over to bridge the gap between them for Liam's sake. But Eleanor was an impenetrable fortress, a woman who held her son on a pedestal and viewed any woman he loved as a rival for his affection and a threat to her influence. The thought of facing Eleanor now in her current state of disarray and humiliation was unthinkable. The taxi driver finally broke the silence. "Ma'am, we've been driving for a while. Is there anywhere I can take you?" His question snapped her out of her daze. She had to go somewhere. She couldn't wander the streets of New York all night. Her own family was hours away in Connecticut, and she didn't want to show up on their doorstep in the middle of the night, a hysterical pregnant mess. A hotel. The thought of checking into a soulless, anonymous room only amplified her sense of desolation. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a new desperate idea began to form in her mind. It was a crazy, reckless idea, born of desperation and a strange, inexplicable instinct. "Can you take me to the Upper East Side?" she said, her voice stronger now, laced with a newfound, albeit fragile, resolve. "I have the address." She gave the driver the address to Eleanor Rollins' townhouse, a place she had only visited a handful of times. Each visit a carefully orchestrated, emotionally taxing performance. She didn't know what she would do when she got there. She didn't have a plan. All she knew was that she couldn't be alone. And in a strange, twisted way, the one person who had never offered her an ounce of warmth or comfort was the only person she could think of to turn to. Perhaps it was a desire for confrontation, a need to face the woman who had always seen her as an intruder. Or perhaps in the deepest, most irrational corner of her heart, it was a desperate plea for help. The townhouse was a formidable 4-story brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. It exuded an aura of old money and untouchable prestige. As Olivia paid the driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk, she felt a fresh wave of trepidation. The house was dark, save for a single light glowing in a downstairs window. It was after midnight. What was she doing? She walked up the stone steps, her hand trembling as she reached for the ornate brass knocker. She hesitated for a long moment, the cold metal a stark contrast to her own feverish skin. Then before she could lose her nerve, she let it fall. The sound echoed in the stillness of the night, a loud, desperate summons. She waited, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was about to turn away, convinced of her own insanity, when the heavy oak door creaked open. And there, bathed in the soft glow of the hallway light, stood Eleanor Rollins. She was dressed in a silk navy blue dressing gown, her silver hair perfectly coiffed even at this late hour. Her face a canvas of aristocratic lines and carefully controlled emotions registered a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly replaced by her usual icy composure. "Olivia," she said, her voice as cool and crisp as a winter morning. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" And then, for the first time that night, Olivia's carefully constructed dam of composure broke. The tears she had been holding back for hours finally came a torrent of grief, anger, and despair. Her body shook with sobs, and she had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "He left me," she cried, the words torn from her throat. "At the restaurant, he just left me." She expected a cold, dismissive response, and "I told you so." A door slammed in her face, but instead she saw something she had never seen before in Eleanor Rollins' eyes, a flicker of something that looked almost like concern. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze taking in Olivia's tear-streaked face, her designer dress, her pregnant belly. She looked at her daughter-in-law, not as a rival or an intruder, but as a woman on the brink of collapse. And then she did something that Olivia would never have predicted in a million years. She stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "Get in," she said, her voice still cool but laced with an undeniable note of command. "You're not staying out here." It wasn't a warm invitation. It wasn't an embrace. But it was, in its own strange way, a lifeline. And as Olivia stepped over the threshold out of the cold, lonely night and into the intimidating warmth of her mother-in-law's home, she knew that her life had just taken another completely unexpected turn. The woman she had always considered her adversary had just become her unlikely and perhaps only savior. The interior of Eleanor Rollins's townhouse was exactly as Olivia remembered it, impeccable, imposing, and exuding a quiet, almost suffocating elegance. The air was scented with beeswax and old money. Dark polished wood antique furniture and walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Rollins ancestors created an atmosphere of a private museum rather than a home. It was a space designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind all who entered of the weight of the Rollins legacy. Eleanor led her not to one of a dozen formal sitting rooms, but to a cozy book-lined study at the back of the house. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering light on the leather-bound volumes and plush velvet armchairs. It was the one room in the house that felt lived in, a sanctuary from the rigid formality of the rest of the townhouse. Eleanor gestured for Olivia to sit in one of the armchairs by the fire. "I'll have Mrs. Gable make you some tea," she said, her tone businesslike, as if she were dealing with an unexpected but manageable crisis. "You don't have to," Olivia murmured, sinking into the soft velvet. The warmth of the fire was a welcome comfort, a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Nonsense," Eleanor said crisply. "You're in shock, and you're pregnant. You need to stay calm." She left the room, her silk dressing gown rustling softly as she walked. Olivia was left alone with the crackling fire and the silent, judging eyes of the Rollins ancestors in their gilded frames. She felt a fresh wave of tears threaten to overwhelm her, but she fought them back. She would not fall apart again. Not now. A few minutes later, a kindly gray-haired woman in a simple black dress entered the room carrying a silver tray with a teapot, a cup and saucer, and a small plate of biscuits. This was Mrs. Gable, the Rollins' longtime housekeeper, a woman who had been with the family since Liam was a boy. She gave Olivia a small, sympathetic smile as she set the tray down on the table beside her. "Mrs. Rollins told me what happened, dear," she said softly, her voice thick with a gentle Irish brogue. "Don't you worry. You're safe here." The simple, unadorned kindness from this stranger was almost Olivia's undoing. She managed a watery smile and a mumbled, "Thank you," as Mrs. Gable poured her a cup of chamomile tea. Eleanor returned just as Mrs. Gable was leaving. She sat in the armchair opposite Olivia, her posture ramrod straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The firelight played across her face, softening the harsh lines but not the intensity of her gaze. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Olivia sipped her tea, the warm liquid a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. The silence was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was a strange, unexpected truce, a temporary ceasefire in their long, undeclared war. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "From the beginning." And so Olivia did. The words poured out of her, a jumbled, emotional torrent. She told her about the cryptic text, the tense dinner, the cold, dismissive words, the public humiliation. She told her about the growing distance between her and Liam over the past few months, the whispered phone calls, the late nights at the office. She laid bare her fears, her confusion, her heartbreak. She expected judgment, criticism, a subtle "I told you so." But Eleanor listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer any platitudes or false reassurances. She simply listened. When Olivia had finished, her voice hoarse with emotion, the room fell silent again. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. "The Sterling Cross deal," Eleanor said at last, her voice thoughtful. "He's been obsessed with it. He's poured everything into it. His money, his time, his energy." "I know," Olivia said quietly. I thought that's what all of this was about. The stress." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "But that doesn't explain his behavior tonight. To do that to you, to his pregnant wife, in public. That's not just stress. That's cruelty. That's something else." She looked at Olivia, then her blue eyes, so like her son's, sharp and penetrating. "You said you suspected there might be another woman." Olivia's heart clenched. I don't know. It's just a feeling. A horrible, gut-wrenching feeling." Eleanor was silent for a moment, her lips pursed in a thin, determined line. "Liam is my son," she said, her voice steely. "I love him, but I am not blind to his faults. He can be ruthless. He can be selfish. He has always gotten everything he's ever wanted, but I have never known him to be cruel for the sake of it." She stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace, a lioness in her cage. "This is not just about you and him," she said, her voice rising with a new fierce energy. "This is about my grandchild, the future of this family, and I will not allow him or anyone else to jeopardize that." She stopped her pacing and turned to face Olivia, her eyes blazing with a fire that Olivia had never seen before. "You will stay here," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This is your home now. You and the baby will be safe here. I will handle Liam." Olivia stared at her, stunned into silence. The woman who had been her greatest adversary was now her fiercest protector. It was a dizzying, disorienting shift, and she didn't know what to make of it. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why are you doing this? I thought you didn't approve of me." A flicker of something that looked like regret crossed Eleanor's face. "My relationship with my son is complicated," she said, her voice softer now. "I may not have always shown it, but I have seen how you've made him happy. And I know that he loved you. Deeply." She sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "And as for my disapproval," she continued, "perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I was too concerned with the Rollins name and not enough with my son's happiness. But that is in the past. What matters now is you and the baby. And I will not let Liam destroy his own family out of some misguided, selfish impulse." She walked over to Olivia and, to her utter astonishment, placed a hand on her shoulder. Her touch was light, almost hesitant, but it was there. A small, fragile bridge between two women who had once been on opposite sides of a vast emotional chasm. "Get some rest," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "Tomorrow we will figure out what to do. But tonight you are safe. I promise you that." As Olivia was shown to a luxurious guest room, a room larger and more opulent than her first apartment, she felt a strange sense of unreality. The day had been a nightmare of epic proportions, a roller coaster of emotions that had left her feeling battered and bruised. But as she sank into the soft four-poster bed under the watchful, protective roof of her once enemy, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt since Liam had walked out of that restaurant, a tiny, fragile spark of hope. She didn't know what the morning would bring. She didn't know if her marriage was truly over, if her husband was with another woman, if her life as she knew it was gone forever. But she knew one thing for certain: she was not alone. And in the battle that was to come, she had just gained the most unlikely and most powerful of allies. The next morning, Olivia awoke to the soft morning light filtering through the heavy damask curtains. For a fleeting moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room and the unfamiliar silence, a stark contrast to the bright sun-drenched penthouse she had shared with Liam. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, a tidal wave of pain and confusion. She sat up in bed, her hand instinctively going to her belly, a silent reassurance to the little life that was growing inside her. She was about to give in to the fresh wave of despair that threatened to pull her under when there was a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Gable entered carrying a breakfast tray laden with fresh fruit pastries and a steaming pot of coffee. "Good morning, dear," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "Mrs. Rollins thought you might like to have your breakfast in bed." The simple act of kindness, the quiet, dignified service, was both comforting and deeply unsettling. She was a guest in a gilded cage, a prisoner of her mother-in-law's unexpected charity. After breakfast, she dressed in the clothes she had worn the night before, the emerald green Valentino gown, a cruel reminder of her shattered dreams. She found Eleanor in the study, already dressed in a sharp, tailored Chanel suit, a string of pearls around her neck. She was on the phone, her voice low and commanding. "I don't care what he says," she said, her voice like ice. "You find out. Now." She hung up the phone with a sharp click and turned to Olivia, her face a mask of grim determination. "Good morning," she said, her tone all business. "I trust you slept well." "As well as can be expected," Olivia replied, her voice quiet. "I have my people looking into Liam's financials, his recent phone records, his social activities." Eleanor said, her voice laced with a cold fury. "We will find out what is going on. I promise you that." She gestured for Olivia to sit. "In the meantime," she said, "we have a more immediate problem. Liam, he's been calling my phone all morning. He knows you're here." Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. "What does he want?" "To speak to you, of course," Eleanor said, a sneer in her voice. "To explain, to apologize, to try and worm his way back into your life with a string of empty promises and expensive gifts." She looked at Olivia, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Do you want to speak to him?" Olivia's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A part of her, the part that still loved him, that still clung to the hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, wanted to hear his voice, to hear his explanation. But another stronger part, the part that had been shattered and humiliated, knew that she was not ready. She was too raw, too vulnerable. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Not yet." Eleanor nodded, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "Good," she said. "That's the right decision. You need time, and you need answers. We will not let him control this narrative." Just then the intercom on Eleanor's desk buzzed. "Mrs. Rollins." Mrs. Gable's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Liam is here. He's insisting on seeing you." Eleanor's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "Tell him I am not available," she said, her voice cold and imperious. "And tell him that if he sets one foot on my property without my express invitation, I will call the police and have him arrested for trespassing." There was a moment of silence from the intercom, and then Mrs. Gable's voice sounding slightly flustered. He says he's not leaving until he speaks to Olivia." Eleanor's face hardened. She stood up and walked to the window, peering through the lace curtains at the street below. A sleek black Bentley was parked at the curb, Liam's signature car. "The arrogance of that boy," she muttered to herself. Then she turned to Olivia, her mind clearly made up. "Stay here," she commanded. "Do not answer the door. Do not speak to him. I will handle this." And with that, she swept out of the room, a warrior queen on her way to defend her territory. Olivia was left alone once more, her heart pounding in her chest. A prisoner in a gilded cage, while outside the man she had once loved, the father of her child, was laying siege to her sanctuary. The battle for her future had just begun, and she was caught right in the middle of it. The confrontation on the steps of the Upper East Side townhouse was a quiet storm, a battle of wills waged not with shouts and fury, but with the chilling precision of ice-cold words. Olivia watched from the study window, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, as Eleanor descended the stone steps to face her son. Liam stood on the sidewalk looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usually immaculate Tom Ford suit was rumpled. His hair was unkempt and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, a man tormented by his own actions. But as he saw his mother approach, his expression hardened, a mask of defiance slipping into place. "Mother," he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger, "let me see her." "She doesn't want to see you, Liam," Eleanor replied, her voice dangerously calm. She stood on the top step, a formidable, unmovable obstacle. "That's not for you to decide," he shot back, taking a step forward. "She's my wife." "A wife you publicly humiliated and abandoned in the middle of a restaurant," Eleanor retorted, her voice dripping with contempt. "You have lost the right to make demands, Liam. You will leave. Now." "I'm not leaving until I talk to her," he insisted, his voice rising. "I need to explain." "Explain what?" Eleanor's voice was a whip crack. "That you're a coward, that you would throw away your marriage, your family, your unborn child on a whim. There is no explanation for what you did, Liam. There is only shame." Their words were lost to Olivia as the wind picked up, but she could see the tension in their bodies, the rigid set of their shoulders, the angry gestures. It was a scene she had never imagined, the all-powerful Liam Rollins being dressed down by his own mother on a public street. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Liam seemed to deflate. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and defeat. He said something to his mother, his voice low and pleading, but she shook her head, her expression unyielding. He stared at the house for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window where Olivia stood, as if he could feel her presence. Then he turned and got back into his car, the Bentley pulling away from the curb with a quiet, powerful roar. Eleanor watched him go, her face a mixture of anger and a deep maternal sadness. Then she turned and walked back into the house, her composure once again perfectly in place. She found Olivia still standing by the window, her hands pressed against the cool glass. "He's gone," Eleanor said simply. "What did he say?" Olivia asked, her voice a whisper. "The usual," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "That he made a mistake, that he loves you, that he wants to make it right. Empty words." She walked over to her desk and picked up a file that had been delivered by a courier while she was outside. "This, however," she said, her voice taking on a new hard edge, "is not empty. This is the preliminary report from my investigator." She opened the file and began to read, her eyes scanning the pages with a fierce, focused intensity. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken dread. Olivia held her breath, her mind racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities. "Well," Eleanor said at last, her voice laced with a bitter, triumphant irony, "it seems our Liam has been a very busy boy." She looked at Olivia, her eyes full of a strange, almost pitying light. "There is another woman," she said, the words falling like stones into the silent room. Olivia's world, already so fragile, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The suspicion she had been trying to suppress, the fear she had been refusing to acknowledge, was now a cold, hard fact. "Who is it?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Eleanor's lips twisted into a sneer. "Her name is Isabella Rossi," she said, her voice full of disdain. "A model, a socialite, a vapid, ambitious little creature who has been clinging to the fringes of our social circle for years, just waiting for an opportunity to sink her claws into a man like my son." She tossed the file onto the desk. It landed with a thud that echoed the thud of Olivia's own heart. "He's been seeing her for months." Eleanor continued, her voice a relentless, merciless narration of Liam's betrayal. "He's been showering her with gifts, a penthouse apartment in Soho, a sports car, a closet full of designer clothes, all while his pregnant wife sat at home waiting for him." The details were a blur of pain for Olivia. All she could hear was the confirmation of her deepest fears. Liam, her Liam, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, had been living a double life. Their marriage, their love, their future had all been a lie. But the investigator's report held another, even more shocking revelation. "It gets worse," Eleanor said, her voice grim. "It seems our Isabella is not just a pretty face. She is the daughter of Marco Rossi." The name meant nothing to Olivia, but she could see from the look on Eleanor's face that it was significant. Marco Rossi. Eleanor explained, her voice low and dangerous, is the CEO of Sterling Cross. The room spun. The Sterling Cross deal. The deal that Liam had been so obsessed with, the deal that had been consuming all of his time and energy. It wasn't just about business. It was about her, Isabella. The deal is a sham, Eleanor said, her voice full of a cold, dawning horror. Rossi is on the brink of bankruptcy. He's been cooking the books for years. The merger is his last desperate attempt to save his company, to use Rollins Industries' capital to bail himself out. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture of a betrayal so vast, so calculated, that it took Olivia's breath away. Liam knows. Olivia said the words, a dawning, horrified realization. He has to know. Of course he knows. Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a rage that was both maternal and fiercely protective of the family name. He found out weeks ago. My investigator has records of secret meetings of back-channel communications. He knows that Rossi is a fraud. He knows that the merger will be a financial disaster for Rollins Industries. Then why? Olivia cried, the question torn from the very depths of her soul. Why would he do this? Why would he risk everything? His company, his family. For her. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her face a mask of grief and a terrible dawning understanding. Because he's not just in love with her, she said, her voice a barely audible whisper. He's being blackmailed. The word hung in the air, a final devastating blow. Blackmail. Isabella is pregnant, Eleanor said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. She's claiming the child is Liam's, and she and her father are threatening to go to the press to expose the affair, to create a scandal that will not only destroy Liam's reputation, but will also send the stock of Rollins Industries plummeting, making it ripe for a hostile takeover. Olivia sank into a chair, the strength gone from her limbs. Her mind struggled to process the sheer scale of the deception, the layers of lies and betrayal. Liam hadn't just left her. He had been planning to destroy his own company, to sacrifice his family's legacy to protect a lie. The public humiliation, the cold, cruel words at the restaurant, it had all been a performance. A desperate, misguided attempt to push her away, to protect her from the fallout of the impending scandal. He hadn't left her because he didn't love her. He had left her because he was trapped in a web of his own making, a web of deceit and desire that was about to bring his entire world crashing down. He's a fool, Eleanor said, her voice a mixture of anger and despair. A sentimental, reckless fool. He's about to sacrifice a kingdom for a commoner, a legacy for a lie. She looked at Olivia, her eyes full of a new steely resolve. But we are not going to let that happen, she said, her voice ringing with a fierce protective power. He is my son, and this is my family, and I will not stand by and watch him destroy everything that our family has built over generations. She walked over to Olivia and took her hands, her grip surprisingly strong. You and I, she said, her voice a low, determined vow. We are going to fight back. We are going to expose the Rossis for the frauds they are. We are going to save Rollins Industries. And we are going to save my son from himself. In that moment, Olivia saw Eleanor Rollins not as a cold, distant matriarch, but as a warrior, a general preparing for battle. And she knew with a certainty that cut through the fog of her pain and confusion that she would stand and fight beside her. For her unborn child. For the future of the family that she was still a part of. And for the man she still loved, the man who was lost in a wilderness of his own, making the man who desperately needed to be saved. The war had just been declared, and the two Mrs. Rollins were about to march into battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, hushed phone calls, and the quiet, meticulous gathering of ammunition. Eleanor's townhouse transformed from a museum of ancestral pride into a war room. The study, once a place of quiet contemplation, was now command central, its mahogany desk littered with financial reports, legal documents, and surveillance photos. Olivia, still reeling from the shock of the revelations, found a strange sense of purpose in the midst of the chaos. The initial all-consuming heartbreak began to recede, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. An anger directed not only at Liam for his weakness and betrayal, but at the Rosses for their predatory, parasitic greed. She was no longer just a victim. She was a woman with a stake in the fight, a queen defending her heir's birthright. She and Eleanor formed an unlikely yet formidable alliance. They were two sides of the same coin, Eleanor with her ruthless pragmatism, her deep understanding of the corporate world, and her network of powerful, influential contacts, and Olivia with her intimate knowledge of Liam, her quiet, observant nature, and a surprising, newly discovered inner strength. They worked tirelessly, poring over the documents provided by Eleanor's investigator. They found a trail of shell corporations' offshore accounts and falsified profit and loss statements that painted a clear picture of Marco Rossi's long-running fraud. He was a house of cards, and Liam, in his infatuation and desperation, was about to become the foundation that would allow him to rebuild his crumbling empire. "He's a snake," Eleanor muttered one afternoon, her finger tracing a line of illicit transactions on a bank statement. "A common garden-variety snake. And my son, my brilliant Harvard-educated son, has fallen for the oldest trick in the book." Olivia, meanwhile, focused on the personal front. She provided the investigator with details of Liam's habits, his routines, the names of his closest confidants. She remembered hushed conversations, half-overheard remarks, small, seemingly insignificant details that in the light of the current crisis took on a new, sinister meaning. One evening, as they were working late in the study, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of righteous fury, Olivia had a breakthrough. "The locket," she said suddenly, her mind flashing back to a conversation she'd had with Liam months ago. Eleanor looked up from the legal document she was reading. "What locket?" "Isabella's locket," Olivia explained, her voice gaining momentum as the memory became clearer. "Liam mentioned it once. He said she never takes it off. It was a gift from her father. He said it was sentimental." "A sentimental gold-digging tramp," Eleanor sneered. "What of it?" "Liam said it had a tiny, almost invisible clasp." Olivia continued, her eyes alight with a dawning idea. "He said it was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a safe. A place to keep something small, something important." Eleanor's eyes widened. She leaned forward, her interest piqued. What could be so important that she would carry it around her neck? "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "But Liam was fascinated by it. He said it was a masterpiece of engineering, and he said that Marco Rossi had a similar one, a tie pin." Eleanor was on her feet in an instant, her mind racing. "A safe?" she repeated, her voice a low, excited whisper. "A portable, secure storage device. What if that's where he keeps his leverage? The proof of his fraud, the one thing that could incriminate him beyond any doubt." It was a long shot, a wild, desperate gamble, but it was the only thing they had that went beyond financial records and circumstantial evidence. It was a potential smoking gun. "We need to get that locket," Eleanor said, her voice firm, decisive. "And that tie pin." The question was how. They couldn't exactly walk up to Isabella and Marco Rossi and demand their jewelry. They needed a plan, a way to get close to them, to catch them off guard. And then Olivia had another idea, a plan so audacious, so risky that it took even Eleanor's breath away. "The Rollins Foundation Charity Gala," Olivia said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's next week, the biggest social event of the year. The Rossis will be there. They wouldn't dare miss an opportunity to flaunt their new elevated social status." Eleanor stared at her, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across her face. "You want to stage a public confrontation," she said, her voice full of a new grudging respect for her daughter-in-law. "No," Olivia replied, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I want to stage a public redemption. For Liam. And a public downfall. For the Rossis." The plan was simple in its audacity. They would use the gala, an event that would be crawling with the city's most powerful and influential figures, as their stage. Eleanor would work her contacts, planting seeds of doubt about the Sterling Cross deal, creating a buzz of negative speculation that would put Marco Rossi on the defensive. Olivia, meanwhile, would play the part of the wronged wife, but not a broken, pitiful one. She would be a figure of grace, dignity, and quiet strength. She would be there on Liam's arm, a united front, a picture of a marriage that had weathered a storm and emerged stronger for it. The final crucial piece of the plan involved getting the locket and the tie pin. For that, they would need a professional. Eleanor made a call to a man she referred to only as Mr. Chen, a former intelligence operative who now ran a high-end discreet security firm. He was an expert in what he called asset acquisition. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of preparation. Olivia and Eleanor worked in perfect synchronized harmony, a two-woman army preparing for their D-Day. Olivia had a fitting for a new gown, a stunning custom-made Oscar de la Renta in a deep sapphire blue that matched her eyes and radiated a quiet, regal confidence. She met with a public relations expert, a friend of Eleanor's, who coached her on how to handle the inevitable questions from the press, how to project an aura of calm, unassailable grace. The most difficult part of the plan for Olivia was the prospect of seeing Liam again. She hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation outside the townhouse. He had sent a barrage of texts and emails, all of which she had ignored on Eleanor's advice. The night before the gala, however, he showed up at the townhouse again. This time he was not angry or demanding. He was broken. Eleanor let him in, but she stood guard in the hallway as he and Olivia met in the formal living room, a cold, impersonal space that seemed to amplify the distance between them. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and his eyes were full of a deep, haunting despair. "Olivia," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. I am so sorry. For everything." She listened, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest as he tried to explain. He told her about the blackmail, about the threats, about his fear for her and the baby. He told her that pushing her away was the only way he could think of to protect her. "I love you," he said, his voice cracking. "I never stopped loving you. It was all a lie. All of it, except for my love for you." Tears streamed down his face, the tears of a man who had lost everything. And in that moment, Olivia's anger began to melt away, replaced by a wave of pity and a resurgence of the deep, abiding love she had always felt for him. He was a fool, a weak, misguided fool. But he was her fool. "I know," she said softly. "I know everything, Liam." He looked at her, his eyes wide with confusion. What do you mean?" "I know about the Rossis," she said, her voice steady. "I know about the fraud. I know about the blackmail. And I know that you were trying to protect me." She took a deep breath. "And tomorrow night," she said, "we are going to fix it. All of us." She explained the plan, her voice calm and confident. She told him about her alliance with his mother, about the investigator, about Mr. Chen. She told him what he had to do: play the part of the devoted husband, stand by her side, and trust them. He listened, stunned into silence, a look of dawning awe and disbelief on his face. He was seeing a side of his wife and his mother that he had never known existed. When she had finished, he simply nodded, his eyes full of a new, desperate hope. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." The next evening, as Olivia and Liam stepped out of the Bentley and onto the red carpet in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they were met with a flashbulb frenzy. The press, sensing a story, swarmed around them, shouting questions about their rumored separation, about the Sterling Cross deal, about Isabella Rossi. Liam, his hand protectively on the small of Olivia's back, smiled for the cameras, a picture of a man deeply in love with his beautiful pregnant wife. Olivia, radiant in her sapphire blue gown, simply smiled, a serene, enigmatic smile that gave nothing away. They were a united front, a power couple, a picture of unshakable solidarity. And as they walked into the gala, into the lion's den, they knew that the final act of their drama was about to begin. The fate of their family, their fortune, and their future all hinged on what would happen in the next few hours. The Rollins Foundation Gala became the stuff of New York legend. In a breathtakingly orchestrated maneuver, Mr. Chen, disguised as a waiter, deftly lifted the locket from Isabella's neck and the tie pin from her father's suit. The contents, a micro SD card, were delivered to Eleanor, who with a single discreet call to the SEC chairman sealed the Rossi's fate. By the time the dessert course was served, Marco and Isabella were being quietly escorted from the premises by federal agents. The next morning, the headlines weren't of Liam Rollins' affair, but of his cunning role in exposing the largest financial fraud of the decade. The story, as spun by Eleanor's PR team, was one of a brilliant CEO who went undercover, risking his own reputation to protect his company and the market at large. His public shunning of Olivia was painted as a necessary, painful act to shield her from the dangerous criminals he was investigating. Liam, humbled and forever indebted, spent the rest of his life earning back Olivia's trust. They welcomed their son Spencer into a world where his family name had been not just saved but fortified by the quiet, unyielding strength of two women who refused to let their kingdom fall. We hope this story of betrayal, resilience, and unexpected alliances resonated with you. A gender reveal party for a millionaire's baby. The perfect wife, the perfect life, all displayed under a canopy of pink and blue balloons. But what happens when the perfect illusion shatters? This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a story about a woman who was pushed to the edge only to reveal that she'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. When her husband's pregnant mistress crashed the party to destroy her life, she had a surprise waiting for them both. A surprise that would unravel a web of deceit and bring a powerful man to his knees. Stick with me because this story is a masterclass in revenge. The air at the Astor estate didn't just feel expensive, it smelled of it. A carefully curated blend of salt water from the Long Island Sound, the thousands of white roses flown in from Ecuador, and the subtle, clean scent of old money. It was the scent of Barrett Astor's world, a world he had built and one his wife, Jocelyn Wren Astor, had meticulously decorated. Today, that world was painted in saccharine shades of baby pink and powder blue. Their gender reveal party was like everything Barrett did, an exercise in glorious excess. A marquee the size of a ballroom stood gleaming on the east lawn, its silk-draped ceiling shimmering with fairy lights. A string quartet played Vivaldi near a gushing champagne fountain, while Michelin-starred chefs artfully arranged canapes that looked more like jewelry than food. 200 of New York's finest bankers, tech moguls, art dealers, and the women with surgically perfected smiles who accompanied them floated across the manicured grass. They were all there to celebrate the next chapter of the Astor dynasty, their baby. Jocelyn moved through the crowd, a fixed, serene smile on her face. At 7 months pregnant, she felt like a ship in full sail, majestic and slow. Her custom-made organza dress, a gentle cream, flowed around her pronounced bump. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace and fortune. Mrs. Jocelyn Astor, wife of the real estate titan, Barrett Astor, soon to be the mother of his heir. They saw the 20-carat diamond on her finger, the effortless elegance, the adoring husband who never strayed too far from her side. "There's my beautiful Madonna." Barrett's voice, a smooth baritone that could charm investors out of billions, purred into her ear. He wrapped an arm around her waist, his other hand coming to rest possessively on her belly. The baby kicked a sharp jab against his palm. "He knows his father." Barrett chuckled, his smile broad and brilliant for the cameras. Oh yes, there were cameras. A photographer from Vogue and a videographer documenting every perfect moment for their family archives. Barrett understood the currency of perception better than anyone. "Or she's telling you to give her some space." Jocelyn replied, her voice light, betraying none of the acid that had been churning in her stomach for months. He kissed her temple, a public display of affection that felt as cold and rehearsed as a line from a play. "Nonsense, the kid's a genius already. Look at this, Izzy." He gestured around them at the sea of influential faces. "This is all for them. Born on a launch pad to the moon." Jocelyn looked at him, really looked at him. At 42, Barrett Astor was a masterpiece of masculine power. Tall, with expertly tailored clothes that hugged his athletic frame, sharp blue eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. He had the kind of looks and wealth that made people forgive him for anything. For arrogance, for ruthlessness, for infidelity. He thought his wife was his greatest acquisition. Beautiful from a good, though not wealthy family, intelligent enough to be a charming hostess, and docile enough not to question his authority. He believed she was blissfully unaware, content in her gilded cage. He had always underestimated her. That was his greatest mistake. Her best friend Amelia caught her eye from across the lawn. Her expression was a mixture of awe at the spectacle and concern. She was one of the few people who knew the real Jocelyn, the one who had graduated top of her class from Columbia Law before trading a legal career for Barrett's World. She knew Jocelyn's quietness wasn't weakness. As Jocelyn excused herself, promising Barrett she'd be right back, Amelia intercepted her near the rose gardens. "This is insane, Bella," she whispered, her eyes wide. "He didn't just throw a party, he staged a coronation. Theatrics are his specialty," Jocelyn said, her hand instinctively cradling her bump. "How are you holding up? And I mean really?" Amelia's gaze was piercing. Jocelyn took a deep breath, the scent of roses suddenly cloying. "The dress is tight, my feet are swollen, and the smile is starting to cramp my cheeks. Other than that, just peachy." "Bella." "I'm fine, Amelia, I promise. The show is almost over." Her voice was low but firm. She had a plan. A plan she had been meticulously crafting for 112 days. Ever since the day she found the first receipt. Not for a necklace or a secret trip, but for a recurring rent payment on a West Village apartment she'd never seen. It was such a boringly corporate way to discover a person's life was a lie. No lipstick on the collar, just a PDF in a misdirected email. From there, the rest of the lies unraveled with terrifying ease. The late nights at the office, the business trips to the Caymans that were a little too frequent. She had hired a private investigator, the best money could buy her money from the trust her late grandfather had left her, a detail Barrett had always found quaint and unnecessary. The investigator, a discreet man named Mr. Harding, was brutally efficient. He gave her a folder filled with photographs, dates, and times. The other woman's name was Chloe Jenkins, a 26-year-old gallery assistant, pretty eager and utterly disposable in Barrett's world. The real blow, the one that had knocked the air from Jocelyn's lungs and solidified her resolve, came a month ago. Mr. Harding's final report. Chloe Jenkins was pregnant too, about 4 months along. In that moment, staring at a grainy photo of Chloe leaving an OB/GYN clinic, her own baby fluttering inside her, Jocelyn didn't shatter. A strange glacial calm settled over her. Barrett hadn't just betrayed their vows. He had tried to invalidate her entire existence, their child's future. He was building a shadow family, a backup dynasty. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was what sealed his fate. He wasn't just going to lose his wife. He was going to lose everything. "Jocelyn Barrett," a voice boomed. It was Marcus Thorne Barrett's right-hand man and lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit. "It's almost time for the main event. The chopper is 5 minutes out." Of course, Barrett hadn't settled for a simple cake cutting or a box of balloons. No, he had arranged for a helicopter to fly overhead and release colored smoke, pink or blue, to announce the gender of their child to the world. "We're coming, Marcus," Barrett called out, striding over to take his wife's hand. He squeezed it, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt like a manacle. "Ready, my love." "More than ready," Jocelyn said, meeting his gaze. For the first time in months, the smile she gave him was genuine. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap has been set and the prey is walking right into it. He mistook it for wifely devotion. They walked to the center of the lawn where a large white platform had been erected. Their guests gathered around them, their phones held high, a sea of expectant faces. The collective net worth of the people standing on that lawn could have bailed out a small country. They were here for the show, and Jocelyn was determined not to disappoint them. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades began to beat in the distance, growing steadily louder. The sound of impending doom. Barrett's arm was tight around her, his body radiating a smug, triumphant energy. He was the king of his castle, about to announce his heir. He felt untouchable. Jocelyn subtly scanned the perimeter of the crowd. She saw Amelia giving her a shaky thumbs up. She saw Marcus Thorne looking proud. And standing near the main gate, almost hidden by an ancient oak tree, she saw a familiar face from Mr. Harding's report. A woman with a sharp suit and an even sharper expression. Her lawyer, Eleanor Vance. She wasn't just a guest. She was the overture to the opera of Barrett's destruction. Everything was in place. The helicopter was almost overhead now, a deafening roar that drowned out the string quartet. A giant screen behind them showed a live feed of the sky. Barrett squeezed Jocelyn's shoulder, his voice ecstatic. "Look, Izzy, this is it. The moment we've been waiting for." She looked up at the sky, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the serene confidence of a man who believes he holds all the cards, who believes his wife is a beautiful, fragile doll. He was waiting for a puff of pink or blue smoke. He had no idea the storm that was about to break. And then, as if summoned by the chaos in her own heart, she saw her. Pushing her way through the impeccably dressed crowd, a flash of fury in a too-tight red dress. She was younger than Jocelyn, blonde, and her face was a mask of desperate resolve. She wasn't pregnant enough for it to be obvious to a stranger. But Jocelyn, who had studied her photographs like a general studying battle plans, could see the slight telltale curve of her belly. Chloe Jenkins had arrived, uninvited, and the first act of the play was about to begin. Jocelyn felt a thrill, cold and sharp, cut through her. Barrett followed her gaze, and for the first time that day his perfect smile faltered. His face went pale, a stark contrast to his sun-kissed tan. The show was about to get so much better. The world seemed to slow down, the deafening roar of the helicopter blades fading into a dull, distant pulse in Jocelyn's ears. All she could see was Chloe Jenkins, a slash of crimson against the pale pastels of the party, moving with the relentless purpose of a heat-seeking missile. The crowd, sensing a disruption in the carefully orchestrated perfection, began to part before her, murmuring and turning like a startled herd. Barrett's hand on Jocelyn's waist went rigid, his fingers digging into her hip. He muttered a curse under his breath so low only she could hear it. "What the hell is she doing here?" "I don't know, Barrett," Jocelyn said, her voice a placid sea in his storm of panic. "You tell me. She's your acquaintance, isn't she?" His head snapped toward his wife, his blue eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. The mask of the doting husband was gone, replaced by the cornered animal she knew lurked beneath. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a harsh whisper. He started to move toward Chloe, no doubt intending to intercept her, to placate her, to hustle her away before she could detonate the bomb she so clearly carried. But Jocelyn placed a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No," she said, her voice still calm yet carrying an authority that made him pause. "Don't you dare leave my side. Our guests are watching. We are about to welcome our child. You will stand here with your wife." Every word was a steel shard wrapped in velvet. He was trapped. To abandon his wife now on the platform with hundreds of eyes and a Vogue photographer capturing every flicker of emotion would be a fatal error. He would look like a cad running from a scene. So he stood frozen, a statue of impotent rage, as Chloe closed the distance. She stopped at the foot of the small platform, her chest heaving. Her eyes, red-rimmed and wild, were locked on Barrett. She ignored Jocelyn completely, as if she were nothing more than a piece of scenery. "Barrett," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry over the now idling helicopter. "How could you? I've been calling you all day." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The murmuring intensified. Phones which had been pointing at the sky now pivoted to capture this far more interesting drama. Marcus Thorne started pushing through the crowd, his face grim, but he was too far away. Barrett attempted to regain control, plastering a strained, dismissive smile on his face. "I'm sorry you must be confused." he said, his voice artificially loud. "This is a private party." "Confused?" Chloe let out a laugh that was half sob, half shriek. "Oh, I'm not confused. You're the one who's confused if you think you can ignore me. If you think you can stand up here with her and pretend I don't exist." She finally turned her venomous gaze on Jocelyn. "And you?" she sneered, looking Jocelyn up and down, her eyes lingering on the swollen belly. "You think you've won, don't you? Standing there looking so perfect? Well, he doesn't love you. He loves me. He told me." Jocelyn remained silent, her expression one of detached, regal sorrow. She had to play her part, the wronged, dignified wife. It was crucial for what was to come. She let Chloe have her moment. She let the crowd see her as the hysterical interloper, the home wrecker. "This woman is clearly unwell," Barrett announced to the guests, his hand gesturing vaguely for security who were hesitating, unsure how to handle the situation without making it worse. "I apologize to everyone for this unfortunate disruption." "Unwell!" Chloe's voice rose to a scream. "I'll show you unwell, you lying bastard!" And then she delivered the line Jocelyn had been waiting for. The line she knew Chloe would deliver because Mr. Harding's report had included transcripts of her tearful phone calls to her own best friend. She was desperate, and she believed Barrett's lies. She put a hand on her own stomach, a defiant echo of Jocelyn's maternal pose. "I'm pregnant," she declared, her voice ringing across the silent lawn. "I'm pregnant with Barrett Astor's son. He promised me. He promised he was leaving you to be with me and our baby." Chaos. Absolute delicious chaos. The whispers erupted into audible chatter. The Vogue photographer was clicking away a predator sensing a kill. Jocelyn saw the flash of dozens of phone cameras. This moment was already being uploaded, shared, commented on. The Astor gender reveal had just become the social media event of the year for all the wrong reasons. Barrett looked utterly decimated. His face, which had been pale, was now a ghastly shade of gray. He looked from Chloe's determined face to his wife's serene one, then out at the sea of his peers, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to poorly concealed schadenfreude. His perfect world, his carefully curated image, was being torn to shreds in real time. "It's a lie," he stammered, his voice losing its commanding tone. "She's lying. She's obsessed. I barely know her." It was a weak, pathetic defense, and everyone knew it. Chloe laughed again, a sound stripped of all humor. "Barely know me? I have texts, Barrett. Hundreds of them. Pictures. I have the lease to the apartment you pay for. The one where you told me you loved me, where you said your wife was just a business arrangement, that your marriage was cold and loveless." Every word was a nail in his coffin. He was flailing, drowning in the public square, and he looked at Jocelyn, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He expected her to do something, to faint, to cry, to run off in shame. He expected her to create a diversion, to be the hysterical pregnant wife so he could play the part of the beleaguered husband managing two emotional women. She would do none of those things. Instead, she finally spoke. Her voice, amplified by the microphone still clipped to her dress, was clear, calm, and carried across the entire lawn, silencing the gossip instantly. "Actually," Jocelyn said, turning to face the crowd, her hand still resting on her baby bump, "she's not entirely lying." Barrett's head whipped back around to face his wife, his jaw slack with disbelief. Chloe stared, her tirade cut short, confusion clouding her features. The entire party held its breath. Jocelyn looked at Chloe, her eyes devoid of hatred. Instead, she offered a look of something akin to pity. "He did rent an apartment for you in the West Village, Suite 14B on Charles Street. He did take you to Mustique for your birthday in April while telling me he was closing a deal in Singapore. And he did tell you he loved you. Barrett is very generous with his words when he wants something." The level of detail was stunning. Jocelyn could feel Barrett's entire body go rigid with shock. He was staring at her as if he'd never seen her before, in a way he hadn't. "How?" he croaked. She ignored him, keeping her attention on the stunned guests and the very confused mistress. "And you are indeed pregnant." she continued, her voice smooth as silk. "About 16 weeks, I believe. Congratulations. Barrett and I are so very excited about additions to the family." The sarcasm was subtle, but it landed like a precision-guided missile. Then Jocelyn turned her attention fully to her husband. The serene mask fell away, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as a diamond. "But this is where the story gets interesting," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "Because while Barrett was making promises in your little love nest, he was being careless. And while you," she said, glancing at Chloe, "were planning your future with a married man, you made one fatal miscalculation." She let the silence hang in the air for a beat, savoring the moment of absolute power. The helicopter was still hovering, forgotten. The pink and blue decorations seemed absurd now, relics of a reality that no longer existed. "You both," Jocelyn said, her eyes sweeping over Barrett and Chloe, "underestimated me." She gave a slight nod. It was a prearranged signal. From the edge of the crowd, two figures began to move forward. Not security, not party planners. One was Eleanor Vance, her lawyer, her leather briefcase in hand. The other was a burly, stern-looking man, a professional process server. They walked calmly, purposefully up to the platform. Barrett watched them approach, his face a canvas of dawning horror. He finally understood. This wasn't an interruption of his wife's party. This was her party. "Barrett Astor," Eleanor said, her voice crisp and professional. "This is for you." The process server handed a thick sheaf of documents to Barrett. His hands trembled as he took them. "What is this?" he whispered, though he already knew. Jocelyn smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. It was a smile of victory, of liberation, of glorious, righteous vengeance. "That, my love," she announced, her voice ringing out for all to hear, "is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery. It's filed along with a motion to freeze all your personal and corporate assets pending a forensic audit. An audit, by the way, that's already been completed." She turned to Chloe, whose face had gone from triumphant to utterly bewildered. "And as for your baby," Jocelyn said, her voice softening just a fraction, "I hope for his sake he looks like you, because he won't be seeing a single dollar of the Astor fortune. You see, a month ago, in light of Barrett's extracurricular activities, I had him sign an updated post-nuptial agreement." Jocelyn looked back at her husband, whose face had crumpled in utter defeat as he stared at the papers in his hand. "An agreement that contains a rather stringent infidelity clause, one that renders our original prenup null and void and awards me 70% of all marital assets. It also disinherits any and all issue conceived outside of our marriage. I believe your lawyer Marcus has a copy. I had Eleanor send it to him this morning. I do hope you read the fine print, darling." The helicopter, its pilot, finally getting a signal from the ground crew, chose that exact moment to act. A huge billowing cloud erupted from its underbelly, spreading across the sky. It wasn't pink, it wasn't blue. It was a brilliant, triumphant, and utterly unapologetic cloud of gold. The crowd gasped. It was a statement so bold, so audacious, it was breathtaking. Gold. The color of money. The color of victory. Her victory. Jocelyn leaned into the microphone one last time. "It seems there's been a change of plans," she said, her voice echoing across the lawn. "The gender of my baby is a private matter for my family. But today we are revealing something far more important. My independence." And with that she turned, took Eleanor's arm, and walked off the platform, leaving her husband financially and socially ruined, standing next to his pregnant mistress amidst the wreckage of the perfect life he thought he controlled. The show was over, and she had been the star. Her exit was not a retreat. It was a victory lap. As Jocelyn and Eleanor walked away from the platform, a path cleared for them as if by royal decree. The gawking, gossiping assembly of New York's elite parted their faces, a mixture of shock, admiration, and fear. She was no longer just Barrett Astor's pretty wife. She was a force of nature, a woman who had just publicly executed her own king. She could feel their reassessment of her in the shifting atmosphere. She had become legendary in the span of 5 minutes. Amelia rushed to her side, her face pale but her eyes shining with fierce pride. "Bella, my God," she breathed, grabbing Jocelyn's free hand. I have no words. That was biblical. "I told you the show was almost over," Jocelyn replied, a genuine smile finally touching her lips. It felt strange, like using a muscle that had atrophied. "Now comes the paperwork." Eleanor Vance, her stoic, brilliant lawyer, gave a thin, approving smile. "The paperwork is the best part, Jocelyn. It's the codification of his demise." They didn't flee the scene. That would have seemed weak. Instead, they moved with purpose towards the main house, the grand stone manor that had been her beautiful prison. From the corner of her eye, Jocelyn saw the aftermath on the lawn. Barrett stood as if petrified, the divorce papers dangling from his hand like a white flag of surrender. Chloe Jenkins had sunk to the manicured grass, her crimson dress pooling around her, her face buried in her hands. The public declaration she had hoped would be her triumph had made her a pariah. She had come to claim a king, only to find herself tied to a court jester in the middle of his own dethroning. Marcus Thorne had finally reached Barrett, his face a thunderous mask of fury and disbelief. Jocelyn could imagine their conversation. "How could you be so stupid, Barrett? How could you sign that post-nup?" The truth was, Barrett's arrogance had been her greatest weapon. The post-nup signing had been a work of art. She had presented it to him not as a weapon, but as an act of faith. It was 3 weeks after she confirmed Chloe's pregnancy. She had staged a romantic dinner, told him she'd been feeling insecure about their future, about the baby changing things. She'd cried beautifully and convincingly. "I know how powerful you are, Barrett," she'd whispered, her head on his chest. "I just want to feel safe. I want to know that no matter what, you'll always choose me, that you'll always choose our family." She'd framed the infidelity clause as a testament to his fidelity. "Let's sign this," she'd said, "to prove to the world and to ourselves that we are unbreakable." He had eaten it up. His ego, so vast and insatiable, saw it as the ultimate tribute. His loyal, loving wife was so devoted she wanted to legally bind them together against a hypothetical threat. He was at that very moment embodying. He'd signed it without even letting Marcus review it properly. So eager was he to play the role of the magnanimous, trustworthy husband. He thought it was a love letter. It was a suicide note. As they entered the cool, marble-floored foyer of the house, Jocelyn's personal staff was already moving with quiet efficiency. Her head of security, a former Mossad agent named David, met them at the door. He was on her payroll, not Barrett's. "Mrs. Astor," he said with a respectful nod, "your car is ready. Your bags are already in it. The security detail is in place." "Thank you, David," she said. "Mr. Astor will be detained here for a while. Please ensure he and his guest—" She let the word hang in the air. "Do not leave the premises until I have cleared the area. And please relieve him of his phone." David's lips twitched. "With pleasure, ma'am." Everything was moving according to the intricate timeline Eleanor and Jocelyn had mapped out over weeks of clandestine meetings in Eleanor's midtown office. While Barrett thought his wife was at prenatal yoga or meeting with interior designers for the nursery, she was plotting his downfall with the precision of a military general. They had discovered so much more than just an affair. The forensic accountant she'd hired, a genius recluse who could find a hidden dollar in the Vatican's coffers, had uncovered a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Barrett wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was preparing to cheat her in a divorce, hiding assets in anticipation of a future split. He was planning to leave her with the scraps of his empire. The irony was poetic. The post-nup he had so foolishly signed now gave her claim to a significant portion of those very assets he had tried to hide. His attempts to defraud her would now bankrupt him. Upstairs in the master suite that overlooked the now chaotic party, 2 trusted housekeepers were packing the last of her things. Not the lavish gowns or the jewelry Barrett had bought her. Those were material possessions she could leave behind without a second thought. They were packing the things that mattered: photo albums of her own family, her grandfather's collection of first edition books, her law degree framed in simple black wood. The pieces of Jocelyn Wren that existed long before Jocelyn Astor was ever invented. Amelia sat on the edge of the vast canopied bed, looking around the opulent room. "So, this is it. You're just leaving." "This was never my home, Ames," Jocelyn said, running a hand over the smooth, cool wood of her jewelry box where she kept her grandmother's simple gold locket. "It was a stage. The play is over. It's time to strike the set." She opened the box, took out the locket, and fastened it around her neck. It felt warmer and more valuable than the mountain of Astor diamonds she was leaving behind. Eleanor cleared her throat from the doorway. "Jocelyn, the markets are closed now, but the moment they open Monday, we file the injunction. The news of this," she gestured vaguely towards the window, "will hit the financial press by morning. His company's stock will plummet. The board of directors, many of whom are down there, will be forced to call an emergency meeting. With his assets frozen and this public scandal, his position as CEO will be untenable." This was the final brutal checkmate. Jocelyn wasn't just divorcing him. She was professionally and financially castrating him. His power was derived from his reputation and his wealth. By sunset, his reputation was in ashes. By Monday morning, his wealth would be paralyzed. A commotion from downstairs drew their attention, muffled, enraged shouting. It was Barrett's voice. "He's realized he can't call his brokers," Eleanor said with grim satisfaction. "David is efficient." Jocelyn felt a strange sense of detachment. The man screaming downstairs was a stranger to her now. Her love for him had died a slow, painful death over the last few months, and its final breath had been exhaled the moment she saw the proof of Chloe's pregnancy. All that was left was the cold, hard resolve to protect herself and her child. "There's one last thing," Jocelyn said, turning to Eleanor. From her handbag, she pulled out a plain white envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was personal. "Could you see that Miss Jenkins gets this?" she asked. "Discreetly, after we've gone." Eleanor took the envelope, her curiosity piqued. "May I ask what it is?" "It's a copy of a report," Jocelyn said, "and a recommendation." Inside the envelope was a printout of Mr. Harding's file on Barrett's other indiscretions. Chloe wasn't the first. She wasn't even the second or third. She was just the latest in a long line of young, impressionable women he had wooed with the same promises, the same lies, the same rented apartments. The report included details of two other overlapping affairs, one with a yoga instructor and another with the wife of one of his business partners. Also inside was the card of a top-tier palimony lawyer and a handwritten note from Jocelyn. "Chloe," it read, "he was never going to leave me for you. He was never going to leave me for anyone. He doesn't build partnerships. He acquires assets. You and your child deserve better than his lies. The enclosed report might give you some perspective. The lawyer's card might give you a future. Your fight is not with me. It never was. Good luck. I.A." It wasn't an act of kindness, not really. It was a strategic move. Arming Chloe with this information would ensure she would direct her righteous anger where it truly belonged, at Barrett. She would become another legal battle. He would have to fight another drain on his resources and his spirit. It was Jocelyn's final parting gift to him, a hornet's nest delivered by messenger. "You, Jocelyn Astor," Amelia said, shaking her head in wonder, "are playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers." "Barrett taught me the value of thinking 10 moves ahead," Jocelyn replied quietly. "He just never imagined I'd be playing against him." With a final look around the room that held so many hollow memories, she walked out. She descended the grand sweeping staircase, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look towards the sounds of Barrett's pathetic rage. She didn't look out at the wilting party. She looked straight ahead towards the massive oak doors that led to her freedom. As she stepped out into the late afternoon air, the golden smoke from the helicopter had dissipated, leaving behind a clear blue sky. It felt like a promise. A new beginning. The gilded cage was behind her, its bars broken, its master roaring in his self-made prison. She got into the back of the waiting black sedan. The engine purred to life, and the car pulled smoothly down the long gravel driveway, leaving the Astor estate and all its drama in the rearview mirror. Jocelyn didn't look back. There was nothing there for her anymore. Her phone, which had been silent all day on her orders, buzzed in her purse. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. An interesting day at the office. Well played. Your father would be proud. M.T. Marcus Thorne, Barrett's lawyer. A shark he might be, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. He was already hedging his bets, subtly signaling a potential allegiance. The rats were deserting the ship before it had even taken on water. Jocelyn deleted the message. She didn't need allies like him. She had herself, her child, and a fortune built on the ashes of her husband's arrogance. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt truly, completely, gloriously free. The real work was just beginning, but the war, the one that mattered, was already won. The silence that greeted Jocelyn in the Carlisle penthouse was more profound than any noise. It was a thick, weighted silence, the kind that follows a detonation where the air itself seems to be holding its breath. Down below, miles away on the manicured lawns of the Astor estate, her old life was imploding in a cacophony of sirens, shattered champagne flutes, and frantic phone calls. But up here, 30 stories above the city, surrounded by the hushed, old-world elegance of silk wallpaper and polished mahogany, there was only the soft hum of the metropolis and the steady, reassuring beat of her own heart. For the first hour she did nothing. She simply stood by the vast window overlooking Central Park, her hands cradling her belly, and breathed. She focused on the simple mechanics of it, in and out, as if relearning a forgotten skill. The adrenaline that had encased her in an armor of icy resolve for the past several hours began to recede, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion that was bone deep. It was the exhaustion of a soldier after the war is finally truly won. The fight was over. Now she had to learn to navigate the terrain of the peace she had scorched the earth to achieve. Slowly she moved through the suite. Her first act was to shed the costume. The cream organza dress, a symbol of a life that no longer existed, was unzipped and left to pool on the floor like a fallen cloud. In the marble bathroom, she washed the carefully applied makeup from her face, watching the serene mask of Mrs. Astor circle the drain. When she finally looked up, the reflection was just Jocelyn. Tired, pale, but with eyes that held a new, unyielding light. The baby kicked a sharp, insistent jab as if to say, "We're still here. We did it!" A faint, watery smile touched her lips. Her phone, when she finally retrieved it from Amelia, was a useless, buzzing brick of frantic energy. She powered it off without looking at the screen and handed it back. "Let Eleanor's office filter everything," she instructed. "I don't want to hear from anyone but you and her." The world, however, would not be silenced. By morning, the story had gone from a society scandal to a global news event. The Golden Gender Reveal was the lead story on every major network, the top trending topic in a dozen countries. Jocelyn found she couldn't escape herself. On the televisions in the hotel lobby, her face was juxtaposed with Barrett's, hers, serene and resolute, his slack-jawed in disbelief. The public narrative fractured into two distinct streams. To some, she was a feminist icon, a calculating genius, who had brilliantly checkmated a powerful, philandering man. Headlines screamed, "Astor's avenging angel and the woman who took the kingdom." To others, she was a cold, vengeful black widow, a woman whose cruelty was as breathtaking as her beauty. She was both a hero and a villain, depending on the byline. She found it all strangely irrelevant. "They're just writing fan fiction about a life they know nothing about," she told Amelia over tea, gesturing to a tablet displaying the competing narratives. "Let them. The only opinions that ever mattered in this were mine and now my child's." Eleanor arrived that first afternoon, a warrior returning with spoils. She was electric with the energy of the win. The board meeting was a masterclass in self-preservation. she reported, foregoing any preamble as she snapped open her briefcase. Marcus Thorne himself presented the motion to remove Barrett as CEO. He didn't hesitate, cited a crisis of confidence and irreparable reputational risk. I heard from a source that Barrett tried to appeal to them, reminded them of their decades of friendship, the golf trips, the favors. He was met with stony silence. The vote was unanimous. The very men who toasted his success yesterday cut him out like a tumor this morning. The brutality of it was breathtaking. Barrett had built his world on the idea of loyalty, but it was the loyalty of sharks who swim together only until one of them starts to bleed. He was bleeding now, and his oldest friends were the first to circle. A week later, Chloe Jenkins' lawsuit became the second front in Barrett's war of attrition. The filing, promptly leaked, was a masterwork of personal grievance and legal strategy, detailing not only Barrett's promises, but also the damning evidence of his other affairs. The yoga instructor, the business partner's wife. It painted a portrait not of a simple adulterer, but of a serial emotional predator. "That envelope you gave her," Amelia mused, looking up from the article. "You didn't just give her a weapon. You gave her a clear enemy and a righteous cause." "I gave her the truth," Jocelyn corrected gently, her gaze distant. "Her fight was never with me. It was with the man who lied to us both." Barrett built his life by keeping his victims in separate boxes, powerless and isolated. I simply gave her the keys to the other rooms. She felt a strange, detached vindication. This wasn't about alliance. It was about ensuring that all the consequences of Barrett's actions landed squarely on his own shoulders. He would not be allowed to frame this as a simple drama between two hysterical women. This was a multifaceted reckoning of his own meticulous creation. A few days after that, Jocelyn felt the first pangs of cabin fever. She needed air that wasn't filtered through a hotel ventilation system. Donning a simple dress, a wide-brimmed hat, and sunglasses, she slipped out of the Carlisle and into the anonymity of the city. She found a quiet bookstore on a side street, the air smelling of paper and dust. As she browsed the history section, she overheard two women a few feet away, their voices hushed but excited. "Can you believe it? She served him the papers at the party? And the gold smoke. The sheer audacity. My friend's cousin knows someone who was there, said you could have heard a pin drop. He deserved it, though. Men like that, they think they're gods." Jocelyn froze her hand, hovering over a biography of Catherine the Great. Her life story was now coffee shop gossip, whispered speculation between strangers. For a vertiginous moment, she felt like a ghost listening to a discussion of her own obituary. But then a sense of calm settled over her. The woman they were talking about, that audacious theatrical creature, felt like someone else. The real Jocelyn was here in a dusty bookstore, choosing a book, a quiet woman about to become a mother. She bought the biography and walked back to the hotel, the encounter solidifying a new resolve to live her life, not the public's version of it. That evening, looking at the fresh round of paparazzi photos Amelia found online, the conversation deepened. The images showed a haggard Barrett, his swagger replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated man. "Do you remember," Amelia said softly, "in law school, Professor Albright said you had the most ruthless legal mind he'd seen in a decade. He said you'd be on the Supreme Court one day, and then you met Barrett and all that fire. It just got banked." Jocelyn looked at her friend. "It never went out, Ames. It was just waiting for fuel." "Well, he certainly gave you that," Amelia said with a wry smile. "Welcome back, Bella." The final act came on a crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 3 months after the party. Jocelyn was in the suite now, feeling more like a home, sketching out the charter for her new foundation when Eleanor called. The usual professional crispness in her lawyer's voice was underlaid with a current of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Jocelyn, the final audit is complete," she began. "The forensic team has been through everything with a fine-toothed comb. The offshore accounts in Nevis, the shell corporations registered in Delaware, the art he'd gifted to a holding company. We found it all. He was greedier and more reckless than we could have ever hoped." Jocelyn sat down heavily in an armchair, her hand resting on her stomach, the baby kicking gently as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "What's the bottom line, Eleanor?" There was a significant pause, the sound of a single important page being turned. After we account for his legal fees, his inevitable settlement with Miss Jenkins, which his lawyers are scrambling to expedite, and his other outstanding corporate debts, Barrett Astor will be left with his personal effects and roughly 4% of his documented net worth. He'll avoid total bankruptcy, but he'll never be a player again. In the world he values, he is finished. He's been ejected from the game. "And on my side," Jocelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. The number Eleanor quoted was not just a number. It was a kingdom. It was generational security, unassailable power, and absolute freedom quantified. It was the price of her pain, and it was the foundation for her child's future. A wave of profound stillness washed over her. It wasn't the giddy joy of winning the lottery. It was the deep grounding weight of finality. The last chain had just rusted into dust. It was truly irrevocably over. That evening she bundled herself in a cashmere coat and walked to Central Park. The setting sun cast long dramatic shadows across the pathways, turning the riot of autumn leaves to fire and gold. The air was cold and clean, and she breathed it in deeply. She walked for a long time, her hand never leaving her belly, feeling the strong, steady living movements of her child within. The golden smoke at the party had started as an act of defiance, a bold theatrical symbol of the fortune she was claiming. But as she stood by the lake watching the last rays of sun glitter on the water's surface, she finally understood its deeper, more personal meaning. Gold is a noble metal. It is tested and purified by intense, unbearable fire. The heat burns away all the impurities, the dross, the weakness, until only the pure, strong, unyielding, and valuable element remains. She had been through the fire. The slow, corrosive burn of discovering Barrett's betrayal, the roaring inferno of the public confrontation, the lonely, smoldering night spent plotting a war while the world thought she was decorating a nursery. It had been a crucible designed to destroy her. Instead, it had burned away the woman she was pretending to be, the docile, decorative, accommodating wife. It had forged her into the woman she was always meant to be. Barrett had wanted to give their child a legacy of power, of excess, of a name that opened doors. He'd wanted to raise an heir to a hollow throne. But the fire had changed everything. Her child, her son, her daughter, would not be born into that cold, transactional world. They would be born into a world of quiet strength, of unshakable integrity, of earned respect. Their legacy wouldn't be the hollow Astor name, but the fierce, resilient Wren blood that ran through her veins. It would be a legacy built not on a launch pad to the moon, but on the solid ground of a mother who knew her own worth, a mother who had walked through hell and emerged not just intact, but golden. Jocelyn's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal. She didn't just get mad, she got smart. She transformed her pain into a meticulously executed plan that reclaimed not only her fortune but her identity and her freedom. She took a situation meant to humiliate and destroy her and turned it into her ultimate victory. Her story proves that you should never ever underestimate a woman who has decided she is done being a victim. What do you think? Was her revenge justified? Was it brilliant, or was it too cold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.